When brothers Marcus and Daniel Carter face sudden humiliation from police in a crowded Atlanta bar, the weight of injustice falls hard and unexpectedly. Sergeant Keller's harsh authority and quick assumptions turn the room tense, fueling outrage and disbelief at how power can be misused. But these officers picked the wrong targets. Hidden behind civilian clothes are two federal agents, carrying the truth that tips the balance. Discover how dignity and justice are reclaimed in a story that grips to the very last moment, where the unexpected reveal changes everything and proves that real strength lies in standing together against prejudice. The bar at the edge of Jefferson Street looked like any other small-town hideout. Low ceilings, glowing light bulbs hanging from old brass chains, the faint smell of fried food mixed with tobacco and spilled beer. The music was soft, the kind played to give patrons an illusion of calm. But beneath the chatter and the flicker of neon, the place carried an undercurrent of unease that only those who had seen too much of the world could detect. Marcus and Daniel Carter occupied a booth near the back wall, their faces half lit by the warm, amber glow of a table lamp. The men were identical at first glance. Same height, same sharp jawlines, the same thoughtful silence when they weren't talking. Yet their energy was distinct. Marcus carried himself with an edge, deliberate, cautious, observant. Daniel's eyes were more open, lighter, with a habit of smiling at things only he seemed to find amusing. For the first time in months they felt a sliver of relief. The operation they'd concluded earlier that day had stretched for 16 exhausting weeks. There had been stakeouts, endless paperwork, pressure from superiors, and too many nights pretending to be people they weren't. It was over now, at least for a moment. And here, in the dim light, they could be just brothers. Not federal agents, not public servants living on adrenaline and protocol. Simply Marcus and Daniel, two men unwinding after a hard fight. "Can you believe it's done?" Daniel asked, lifting his glass. The ice clinked softly. Marcus smirked, eyes still on the table. "I'll believe it when I stop checking my phone every 5 minutes." "You're impossible to relax," Daniel said with a laugh. "Even when we're off duty, you look like you're about to question the bartender." Marcus gave a quiet shrug. "Maybe I am." The light-hearted banter between them, the familiar rhythm of it, was an anchor, something that reminded them of home, of growing up watching their father leave for shifts in uniform, and their mother waiting up until dawn. They'd joined the Bureau for the same reason, to be part of the world that protected others. But tonight, that ideal felt distant, like a memory filtered through smoke. The door swung open. A cold gust of air entered first, then two men in police uniforms stepped inside. The taller one, stout, weathered face, eyes that looked permanently suspicious, scanned the room slowly. Conversations softened. A few regulars turned on their stools to watch. The officers didn't talk to each other. They didn't need to. Their entrance alone folded the room into uneasy silence. Marcus noticed immediately. His instincts, sharpened by years of field work, recognized the subtle shift in atmosphere. He put his drink down and glanced toward the door. The taller officer's gaze caught their table. He narrowed his eyes, nudged his partner, and together they began walking toward the brothers. The rhythm of their steps echoed faintly over the quiet music. Daniel met Marcus's eyes and whispered, "Guess we attract attention, even on our day off." Marcus didn't answer. His expression hardened. "Evening, gentlemen," the officer said flatly, stopping at the edge of their booth. "Mind if I see some identification?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Routine check," came the curt reply. "This isn't a place I see you often. IDs." Marcus straightened in his seat. "We're just having a drink." His tone was calm, but firm. The officer's partner, younger and less confident, hovered behind with tense eyes. "You heard him," he muttered. "Show the IDs." A ripple of discomfort spread through the bar. A few patrons tried to pretend they were uninterested, but everyone was listening. The bartender froze mid-wipe of a countertop, glancing from the officers to the brothers. Daniel pulled his wallet from his pocket slowly, deliberate in his movements. "Not a problem," he said softly. But the words carried weight. There was calm in his tone, yet also something colder beneath it. the kind of tone that precedes storms. Marcus rested his hand on the table. Every muscle in his body was alert, though his face betrayed nothing. In his line of work, silence was often louder than argument. His mind calculated 100 possible outcomes in seconds. He knew how fast misunderstandings could spiral when ego entered the room. The older officer leaned forward slightly. His eyes flicked over the brothers, their clothes, their posture, their identical calmness, and something in his expression shifted. It wasn't curiosity. It was doubt, wrapped in authority. He exhaled. "You boys from around here?" Daniel looked at him evenly. "We grew up south of here. Is there a reason you're asking?" "Just seems odd," the officer replied, voice tightening. "Two of you dressed like that, sitting here, keeping to yourselves. Makes a man wonder." In the pause that followed, Marcus felt his pulse beating in his temples. It wasn't fear. It was something more complicated. In that moment, he wasn't Agent Carter of the FBI. He was just a man being judged without cause, stripped of his dignity by the gaze of someone who assumed authority, gave them absolute right. He thought of his badge, tucked in his jacket pocket. The irony was almost unbearable, sworn to uphold justice, yet standing under the shadow of its misuse. Daniel saw that same realization flicker across his brother's face. He knew Marcus well enough to sense the rising storm beneath his skin. The officer shifted again. "Not answering could make things harder for you," he warned. Marcus's voice came out low, measured, almost calm. "And what exactly do you think we've done wrong?" The question dropped heavy into the air. The officer blinked, unprepared for the quiet challenge. Daniel broke the silence. "Look," he said evenly, "we're not here to cause trouble. You asked for ID, and you'll get it." He opened his wallet fully now, but slowed down before handing it over. Something in his movement made the older officer hesitate. Marcus noticed the flicker of uncertainty in the man's eyes. That was new, a tiny seed of doubt breaking the surface. Still, the humiliation remained. Every whisper in the room pressed into Marcus's chest like invisible weight. The music faded into near silence again. For a stretched-out moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't just an inspection anymore. It was something deeper, an invisible test that neither brother had asked for, but one both had been forced to face too many times before. Outside, through the window, rain began to fall in slow, uneven drops, tapping faintly against the glass. The flickering neon sign outside buzzed in rhythm with the tension that filled the room. Marcus kept his eyes on the officer's face, unflinching, and Daniel finally placed his ID on the table. It was almost over, though none of them realized how far from over the night truly was. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Daniel's ID lay on the table under the flickering lamp, untouched. The older officer, Sergeant Keller, stared at it, his jaw tightening as if even acknowledgement would cost him something. His partner, Officer Reed, looked uncertain, glancing between the badge and the brothers, feeling the shift in the air but saying nothing. Marcus leaned back slightly, one arm along the back of the booth. His movements were calm, but every second of restraint was visible in his posture. The habit of self-control, refined by years in the bureau, was now tested by the irony of the moment, a routine stop that had become a public spectacle. "Everything all right, Sergeant?" Marcus asked. His tone was neutral, perfectly balanced, but under the calm was steel. Keller didn't answer immediately. He took the ID in his hand, studying it longer than necessary. "You Carter boys said you're from around here?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, grew up just south of the city." "Then you know this part of town gets its share of trouble," Keller said. "A lot of it starts with people sitting quietly, thinking they're invisible." Marcus's stare met his. "We came for a drink after work. Nothing invisible about that." Reed shifted on his feet. "Maybe we should." Keller raised a hand. "I'll handle it." The tension felt alive now, stretching across the room like an invisible line. The bartender kept his head down, shining the same glass over and over. A few patrons whispered but stopped as soon as Keller turned his head. "It's just procedure," Keller said at last, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. "You'd be surprised how often things aren't what they seem." Daniel folded his hands on the table. "You're right about that," he said softly, almost kindly. The way he said it made Keller hesitate. There was something in Daniel's voice, quiet confidence, not defiance, not anger, but the tone of a man who knew more than he let on. Marcus caught the flicker of uncertainty in Keller's eyes. It was the first crack in his armor. Power, Marcus realized, always faltered when met with silent strength. Reed spoke again, this time more tentative. "Sarge, maybe they're fine. The IDs are good." But Keller ignored him. He looked down once more at the federal identification, eyes narrowing at the seal embossed in silver. His mouth tightened. "You work downtown?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Something like that." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means it's been a long week," Marcus replied quietly. Every word hung in the air like static. Keller's pride wrestled with reason. He could sense he was on uncertain ground, but curiosity and instinct kept him from backing off. "Look," Daniel began, tone even. "You've done your job. You checked us out. We're fine. Maybe it's time we let it end there." Keller held his gaze for a long moment. The silence stretched again, a silent tug-of-war between righteousness and restraint. Then he stepped back half a pace, exhaling through his nose, as if realizing how precarious the situation had become. "Fine," he muttered, "just doing my job." When the officers turned to leave, the room seemed to exhale with them. Conversations hesitantly resumed, the low hum returning. Yet for Marcus and Daniel, the moment burned deeper than any confrontation. Daniel picked up his ID, slid it back into his wallet, and smiled faintly. Not the happy kind, but one worn thin by experience. "You saw it, right?" he said quietly once the officers left. Marcus nodded. "Every second. They looked at us like we were a problem first, a person second." Marcus's voice was low. "Happens more often than it should." The brothers sat in silence again. The rain outside had grown steadier, washing the reflections of passing headlights across the window pane. Daniel's hand drummed on the table once. Quiet, rhythmic. "You think they'll ever see people first?" Marcus looked out the window, eyes following the streaks of rain. "One day. Maybe not tonight." The bar had returned to noise and movement, but to them it was still frozen in that single instant. 2 men, 2 badges, and 1,000 unspoken truths caught between them and the world that refused to see who they really were. The storm had thickened outside. Rain traced uneven paths down the bar's windows, catching bits of neon and streetlight, bending them into streaks of blue and gold. Inside, the crowd had thinned, leaving behind the muted hum of low voices and clinking glasses. Marcus sat still, his expression unreadable. He watched the door swing open again. This time it was Keller and Reed returning. Their posture had changed. The confidence that once filled the space around them now carried hesitation. Keller's eyes were restless, as if the weight of what he'd done began settling on his shoulders. Daniel barely looked up when they approached. He had expected it. Men like Keller always came back, when realization struck, when pride faltered, or when guilt started to whisper. Keller cleared his throat. "You still got that ID on you?" His voice wasn't nearly as hard as before. Daniel didn't speak immediately. The air seemed to narrow between them, tensely quiet. He reached into his jacket, pulled the same wallet, and placed it on the table again. This time, though, he didn't open it. Marcus turned his head toward Keller, watching. No hostility, only the silent precision of a man waiting for the right time to speak. Keller hesitated. "Look, I might have come in too strong earlier." It sounded forced, the kind of apology spoken by someone who didn't yet know how to apologize. "This part of town's seen trouble. I was being careful." Daniel looked at him finally, meeting his eyes straight on. "Careful's one thing," he said softly. "Assuming's another." Reed shifted awkwardly beside his partner. "It's been a long week for everyone," he muttered, but the words fell flat. Marcus leaned forward, his voice even, professional. "You wanted proof. You'll have it." He opened his own jacket, pulling out a leather badge wallet, and setting it on the table next to Daniel's. The twin symbols, the golden seal of the United States and the clean letters beneath, gleamed dimly under the low light. Keller froze. The realization came sharp and immediate. The men he'd confronted weren't suspects. They were federal agents, the kind trained to read people faster than he ever could. His hand hovered above the table, uncertain what to do. For a moment, the entire room seemed to tilt. "We're both agents with the Bureau," Marcus said quietly. "Currently assigned downtown." Reed blinked. "You're FBI?" Daniel gave a faint nod. "Correct." The silence broke like glass. Keller's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. The authority in his stance dissolved. Well, his voice faltered. There was no correct word for the blend of shock and embarrassment flooding through him. Daniel stood slowly. "You wanted to see identification. Now you have it." Keller's gaze dropped to the badge again, polished, official, undeniable. All the assumptions, all the hardened habits of judgment revealed their cost in a heartbeat. Reed swallowed. "We didn't know." Marcus looked at him. "You never asked." For a brief moment no one moved. The hum of electricity from the bar's neon sign hummed faintly, rhythmic, almost mocking in its constancy. The power dynamics had reversed completely, but neither brother celebrated. They didn't need to. The truth alone was enough. Daniel picked up his badge, slipped it back into his jacket, and said quietly, "Next time you think someone looks out of place, ask first." His tone carried no malice, only the steady authority of experience. Keller nodded stiffly. "Understood." His eyes avoided theirs when he turned to leave. Reed followed, looking back once, almost as if to offer wordless apology. When the door closed behind them, Marcus exhaled. "You all right?" he asked his brother. Daniel nodded. "You get used to it. Doesn't mean you stop noticing." He smiled faintly, but his eyes were distant. Marcus stared at the empty doorway for a long time. The badges in their pockets weighed more heavily now, not because of pride, but because of the reminder they carried. Authority, justice, truth, all fragile things that meant nothing when hidden under bias. The bartender finally spoke from across the room, breaking the silence. "Didn't think you boys worked for the Bureau," he said quietly. Daniel looked his way. "That's the point," he replied. Outside the rain lightened, washing the street clean. Inside the air began to ease, though the echoes of what had happened would linger long after they were gone. For Marcus and Daniel, this moment wasn't just another encounter. It was a mirror reflecting what they'd sworn to fight. Not just crimes, but the blindness that gave them room to exist. Marcus and Daniel left the bar behind, stepping into the quiet night that shimmered with fresh rain. The city felt different now, calmer, yet layered with the memories of what had just happened inside. Marcus glanced at his brother, searching for a hint of anger, but found only a quiet strength. Daniel's expression was steady, and the way he walked said more than words ever could. The sound of their shoes against wet pavement echoed in the space between buildings. Streetlights painted arching reflections across puddles, turning the ordinary into something almost cinematic. For a moment, neither spoke. Each man wrestled with his own thoughts, frustrations, disappointments, but also a persistent, stubborn hope. They had lived through days tougher than this. What lingered now was not just the sting of injustice, but the knowledge that they had faced it together. At the corner, Marcus slowed his stride. "You know, some things never really change," he said quietly. Daniel gave a small nod. "Maybe, but I'll never let it keep me down." A city bus rumbled past, and in its light Marcus saw the resolve in his brother's eyes. There was weariness there, certainly, the kind born from years spent holding others to account, all while bearing silent burdens of their own. Yet there was also something hopeful, as if every hardship had forged a new piece of strength. Marcus smiled, a rare and genuine curve of lips. "At least we didn't let them walk all over us," he said. Daniel's reply was simple. "That's never been our way." They paused at the edge of a crosswalk, watching as the world moved on around them, cars passing, windows aglow with quiet lives. The past hour flickered through their minds, the tension in the bar, the cold authority of strangers, the risk of standing up for themselves, and the satisfaction of truth finally coming to light. In that quiet moment, Marcus reached into his jacket and touched the badge. It was more than metal. It was a reminder of who he was and what he stood for. Daniel did the same, a silent gesture that meant everything. The rain eased to a soft drizzle, and the city seemed to exhale. Without another word, the brothers stepped forward side by side. They walked toward the promise of a new day, unbroken by what they'd faced. For Marcus and Daniel, dignity, and the hope they carried, was something the world could never fully take away.